Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find us on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Today I figured I made a modification to my kiln, and it's about something that I don't see talked about a whole lot. So I figured I'd go ahead and shoot a quick video before I fired it up. I'll be heat treating some knives this afternoon or evening. And so I figured while the kiln was cold and I could touch everything, why then I might as well go ahead and shoot a video before I set all that up. So anyway, this is my home built kiln. It's been a couple of years since I built it. It works really well for the way my shop is set up and everything, and the way I like to heat treat. I ended up going with this top load style, mostly because the 220 outlet, I only have one 220 outlet here in the shop, and it also runs the welder, and it's kind of back, the outlet's kind of back behind all that stuff. But anyway, so I needed I didn't really feel comfortable putting something that got that hot inside a a wooden workbench like up on the shelves to make a front loader. So I wanted something that I could pull out, set on the concrete, make sure everything combustible is away from it, and be able to work that away. So I found a design for this one. I think it was on Blade Forums, and the guys there had the wiring schematic and everything, so pretty much all I had to do was buy the parts and then modify it to the way that I like using them. In fact, I'm not even too sure. I've never done a video on this before. In case I haven't, it's just a whole bunch of the soft fire bricks. There's 6 laying down this away in the bottom. The frame is just bed frame. You can find that at salvage yards and thrift shops, and along the side of the road an awful lot of time. And it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Makes really good light duty angle iron pretty much. So I just welded up a frame, put 6 bricks on the bottom, and then 3 bricks on either side here, and then cut end bricks to fit. 6 more bricks along the top. Inside the frame there you can see with the handle. Just welded, I don't know if you're going to be able to see them, but yeah, there we go. Just welded strap hinges so that it opens and closes. I could not find an automatic door opening switch, so I've got this toggle switch right here that, if I remember right, it cuts power. It cuts the signal coming out of the PID controller going to the SSRs. You've got a PID controller here, and this runs on 220. So you have 2 120 legs coming in, and if I remember right, I'm kind of weak on wiring, but if I remember right, those lines come in, and I just have a switch for either leg. Those lines come in, I take some power off one of them to run the PID controller. The lines come into 2 SSRs, and these plates have got a whole bunch of holes drilled into them because there was too much heat that was just staying inside these boxes. With the holes drilled in here, that lets some of that heat out while still protecting me from being able to touch anything that's live. Each leg goes into this box and through it's like a real old school ceramic insulator that they used to wire up single family homes. And then each end is attached to a heating element. It's made of 13 gauge Kanthal that I just winded on the lathe whenever I burn one up. It seems like I go through probably 3 or 4 of these a year of the heating elements. And it's got a thermocouple. That's the new one. That's not the one that was in there when I first built it. This thermocouple will go up to, I want to say, like 21 or 2300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is enough for me to do stainless. The old one wasn't hot enough, or it wasn't rated at a high enough temperature to be able to do stainless. And that's where the modification comes in that I made today. Heat treating high carbon steel, you know, you're heating stuff up to, you know, 1500 degrees or so. You do get some scaling of the knife blades and any fixture that you have inside the kiln to be able to hold the blades, you know, upright and in a position where you can grab them real easy. When I started going to the stainless, the 440C, I have to go back and look at my notes, but that's heat treated up around 2000. At that temperature, that 500 degree difference, mild steel or high carbon steel will scale up something fierce. This is my old blade holding fixture. Now, I think this right here was part of a frame off of a mobile home, and it started off as being a little bit over 1/8 of an inch thick steel. And if you look at it in places, you can just bend that just with a fingertip. I mean, it's down to less than 1/16 of an inch thick. And you can see all this stuff right here is just scale for both from the knives plus the fixture. Now this is the part that I don't see talked about a whole lot. These are baffles. I know a lot of guys that heat treat one blade at a time. You know, they will put one blade in the center of the kiln, sometimes at room temperature, bring the whole kiln up with the knife in it to whatever temperature, quench that one knife, and then they're done heat treating for, you know, another week or so. You know, I make a lot of knives, so I generally bring the kiln up to the temperature that I need it to be at, stick 2 to 3 knives in the kiln, set my timer so that you know, at the amount of time that particular steel in that particular thickness needs to come up to the proper temperature for hardening, and then open the door, pull one of the blades out, quench it, let the temperature stabilize back out, open the door, pull the next one out, quench it, you know, and then put the next batch in. Well, what I was noticing before I came up with these baffles is that the sides of the blade that was closer to the heating element, those knives would sometimes warp kind of weird. Sometimes they'd warp like pulling towards the elements, sometimes away. When I put the baffles in, that seemed to stop an awful lot of that. Now these baffles right now, with the scale on them, they look like they're a little bit over 1/8 of an inch thick. These started off as 3/8 inch thick leaf spring sections, and they scale up bad. I mean, you can see that scale just popping off of there, and it'll come up in big sheets, especially at the higher temperature for heat treating stainless. So while I really like the baffles, you know, and they don't come all the way up to the top of the kiln. I still want, you know, plenty of heat to be able to escape that portion of the element. Otherwise, I think that portion of the element might heat up. But what it does is it shields. So I stick a knife in here, and that knife is in line with the thermocouple, and it's getting shielded from the direct heat from the element. When one of these elements, when it fires, it's a lot, the surface temperature of the element is way hotter than what the air temperature inside the kiln is. It has to be, because it's getting a whole bunch of electricity shoved through it to be able to heat up the air temperature inside the kiln. So by putting these baffles in place, that blade will not get the direct heat that could be over what you're after from those elements. And then also, you know, if I put a couple of blades in here, I don't have to worry that this blade and this blade are getting more heat because they're closer to the heating element than the blade in the middle. This area right here, I mean, there's no wind flow or anything inside the kiln, so you just have to worry about radiant heat. But you know, putting those baffles in really helps to even out the heating of your blades. And it, you know, an awful lot of really kind of weird things that were happening before I added the baffles kind of quit happening, and things started steadying out. You know, you'd have blades that you know, when you bent them to 90 degrees to try, you know, to see how tough they were, you know, ones would break while other ones would pass, and they were all out of the same sheet of steel, the same type of steel, and they were all in the kiln at the same time and then quenched in the same oil, but some would break and others wouldn't. As soon as I added these baffles, things like that kind of quit happening. And so I really like the baffles. This new one, the new baffles and the new blade holder are made out of just from some steel that I got down at the the steel yard. It was in their scrap pile, so I don't know what kind of stainless it is, but it shouldn't scale up the way that the carbon steel does that I have been using. So it's an 1/8 of an inch thick piece of plate, and then I just drew lines on the end. I think I've got one of my spare blade holders that I made out of carbon, and you just make a, you know, on this with C-channel, you just come through and you make a whole bunch of cuts and then bend the tabs out that you need, and then your blades will sit in between there like that. The stainless one, it started off as flat stock, so I had to make all my cuts and then bend up the tabs that would hold the baffles and the blades in place. Also, when you cut your slots or bend your tabs up, these, I don't know if you can see it, but there's not a whole lot of wiggle room right there. Whereas this one right here has got quite a bit of wiggle room. So what you ought to do when you're making a baffle like this, or a blade holder like this, is set it up to just accept the thickness of blades that you normally heat treat for most of the holder spaces, and then leave a couple of them a little bit oversized, so in case you want to do a thicker knife, you know, then it'll accept that. Because if you make those slots too far over or too far apart, then that blade can be sitting in the kiln like this, and it can warp under, or it can sag under its own weight once it's hot. But anyways, that's just kind of my thoughts and what I've seen with baffles and kilns. And I guess if I haven't made a video yet on my kiln, it was a pretty simple build. I did have to order the PID controller, the SSRs, the fire bricks, pretty much everything but the frame and the electrical outlet boxes that I use just to kind of keep everything together. Yeah, it's worked out pretty good. Occasionally I have to replace a heating element. Occasionally I have to replace an SSR, but I haven't had to replace one of those since I put these covers with the holes on them. And probably here pretty soon I started studying up a little bit on electronics. I'll probably pull some like computer fans from like computer supplies, like the old desktops that nobody uses anymore. Find a couple of those at the salvage yard or on eBay or whatever, and then mount them to the face of these plates right here, and then wire them into the system, so that when I turn the whole thing on, those fans are running continuous and pulling all that heat away from those components, which should make them last longer. This style with the top opening, it does work and work pretty well. I do have a little bit of a problem keeping the bricks inside the frame. You can see, like when I lift this lid up, the frame comes up and then the bricks come up. So there is, and I've got them, I have all thread run all the way through the bricks, you know, and then mounted to the frame on either side. And that seemed to work pretty well for a while, and then they kind of started breaking down. So I have this stainless steel wire wrapped all the way around the top, and little grooves cut in the top of the bricks for that wire to seat in so that it sits flush. But it has been a really good kiln. It's probably seen, I don't know, maybe 700-800 knives, something like that, pass through it for heat treating. It also works great for annealing. If you're still using wood ashes or vermiculite or anything like that, man, these kilns save an awful lot of time and an awful lot of mess. I think I built this kiln for around $400, I want to say. Just for the less mess. I mean, as soon as I started annealing in the kiln instead of the wood ashes, boy, I threw those wood ashes away and did a little happy dance, because I was constantly having to sweep up the ashes, and you'd put a blade in there too fast and you'd have a whole cloud of ashes come up in your face. It was just horrible, where these kilns are really, really nice for that. I still do have to use the vermiculite to anneal my big choppers that won't fit into this kiln, but it's, I only do a couple of runs of those a year, so for the amount of time that I'm doing on that, I'll just keep using the vermiculite instead of having to build a 4-foot long 220 kiln to be able to anneal those. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it, and if you haven't tried Baffles inside your kiln, give it a shot and you might like it. We'll see you next time.